Hello everyone, what's up? This is Julio speaking. As I said in the previous video, welcome to the quantitative analysis module of case interview fundamentals. What you're going to learn in this video is what an analysis is from a case interview question perspective and from the consulting job perspective. You're going to learn what you're being tested on, what your mistakes and your hits tell your interviewer about your day-to-day skills as a consultant, and what it tells them about what they can expect from you as a consultant. You're going to learn a 4-step approach to make sure that you touch on everything that the interviewer wants to see during a quantitative analysis question, regardless of what question they give you, what industry, what type, how hard it is. And you're going to learn a technique to create structures. It pisses me off that so much content out there, casebooks, videos, YouTube videos, everything, just gives you an analysis question and then shows you the answer as if it's simple. And the truth is, to most of us, it isn't. There are techniques and there are skills that one can learn, and it is possible to learn. It isn't a God-given skill. And I'm going to show you what these techniques are so that you can create structures by yourself. So let's jump right into what is a quantitative analysis from a case interview perspective. So a quantitative analysis question is when an interviewer gives you data and asks you to calculate a number or to calculate a conclusion, for example, such as which of these options is better, does this investment make sense, etc. Let me show you some examples of what analysis questions could be. Take a look at these. Calculate revenue synergies from introducing your competitors' products into Starbucks stores after an acquisition. Calculate cost savings in R&D, research and development, after implementing this new process. Or, given this table of data, how much will it cost to improve the quality of this university's dorm rooms? Now, you can expect to have one or two of these in every case that you do. Every interviewer is going to test your quant skills some way, and this is usually one of them. You might say that these questions are similar to estimation questions because, well, you got to calculate stuff. And the difference from estimations is that in estimation questions, they won't give you any data. Or they'll give you a little bit of data, but they'll ask you to estimate stuff, and you have to come up with a lot of the assumptions. Or maybe they'll even give you the assumptions, but only after you structure. Now, in quantitative analysis questions, they give you some data to begin with. Just a heads up, it's hardly ever all the data you need. So almost every single time you need to ask for more data. But yeah, that's the main difference that you're going to see. And a difference that's not conclusive, but it's helpful and it works most of the times, is that estimations are often market sizings, and they often start with, can you estimate a number for something? And in this case, they ask you to usually calculate a number for something, and it's usually not a market size. Although it could be. They could ask you to calculate a market size and give you a few numbers, and you have to come up with others. And that would really be a gray area between estimation questions and quantitative analysis questions. And honestly, there isn't that much of a difference between them if you look at them from a pure analytical perspective, right? Now, I want to address a common misconception here. Many people call these questions math questions. And I want to break this myth down. These are not math questions, and here's why. So, a math question implies that the most important part of the question is the math, the actual calculation of the numerical answer and getting to the right number, like you would in a 8th grade math test. And this is not the answer at all. Calculating the number does not make you a consultant, it makes you a calculator. The problem-solving skills that you need as a consultant are all about how you get to the number and what you do with it. All right? So this brings me to what is an analysis from a consultant's perspective. This is going to make you understand so much more why I'm saying that these are not math questions. I understand that that's an easy way to identify them when you're talking about them, but it also brings along a lot of baggage, and it makes it seem like the math is the most important part. So I don't want you calling them that and getting yourself in the wrong mindset, okay? So what's an analysis from a consultant's perspective? Conceptually, what you're doing in a consulting project is coming up with several hypotheses and then testing them. For example, you have a hypothesis that your client's addressable market is going to reach $100 billion in 5 years, or that their customers are currently unsatisfied with their product, but the customers are buying anyway because they don't have any other option. Or that if your client and a specific target merge, they can save $500 million in procurement costs by buying in larger bulks. And you're going to use data to test these hypotheses. And you're going to gather this data from research, from your clients' databases, etc. But databases alone are of no use. You can't just look at green data falling like the Matrix guys and take conclusions from them. You need to model them into simpler information which synthesizes that data so that you can actually process it in your mind. But these numbers alone still don't tell you anything. If I tell you that your client's revenues are $20 billion, this will have completely opposite meanings if last year's revenues were 18 billion or if they were 22 billion. Or if I tell you that the market size is 40 billion or if the market size is 400 billion. The meaning is completely different. And so the lesson here is that you also need to compare that number to something else in order to make it meaningful and in order to prove or disprove any hypothesis. And the whole process of testing this hypothesis or all of these hypotheses using data, all the way from figuring out what comparison you're going to make, then gathering the data, then modeling it, then getting to a number, and then actually doing the comparison. This is what a quantitative analysis is from the consulting job perspective. Basically, from all this, what you can understand is that if you're doing a quantitative analysis in a consulting project, you need to have two main skills: the quantitative skills and the communication skills. I will tell you why in a second, but here's what they are. The quantitative skills is basically knowing what comparisons you need to make to get to that conclusion and where those bars are to know if something is true or is false, what numbers from the real world you need to be able to get to those comparisons, and how exactly you can model them to turn raw data into the information that you need. On the soft skill side, you need to be able to discuss on a conceptual level what your analysis is. You need to be able to discuss it before doing it, and you need to be able to discuss it on a conceptual level after doing it, so that you can talk and explain and get input from the team and from the client before and after running the analysis. Now, the reason you need the quantitative skills is obvious. If you don't know what are the comparisons you need to make, you can't make them. If you don't know what numbers you need from the real world, you won't get the numbers because you don't know what they are. If you don't know exactly what you need to do with them, you're going to do random stuff to them and you're going to get to inaccurate numbers. Now, why do you need to be able to discuss it if you are already able to get to the right number? So there are several reasons for that, right? Reason number one, if you discuss your analysis with your team before doing it, you might figure out that something in your thought process is wrong and you need to fix it. You need to run an analysis differently. You might figure out that the analysis doesn't need to be done for some reason, or there's an easier way to do it, and so you end up saving time. And one of the worst things you can do as a consultant, who of course is not screwing up badly, is wasting clients' time. All consultant projects are under time constraint. If you waste someone's time for a week running an analysis that didn't need to be run, you are all going to have a nightless week. It's gonna suck for everyone. All right, and your client's gonna be pissed and you're not gonna get to the results that you want. But there are other reasons for it. Another reason for being able to discuss the analysis on a conceptual level is that you can use more brain power in the analysis and in the project, because if it's not only your brain working on designing the analysis as everyone else's, you can be more precise, you can do better analysis, you can get to a better number, you can also do it more efficiently. Another reason yet for that is that so you can have everyone on board so they can valve your analysis. Basically, an idea that I'm trying to give you here is that when you're doing a consulting project, every single analysis that you do, this might be a bold statement, but every single analysis that you do, someone will be against it. Some stakeholders are going to want one answer, other stakeholders are going to want another. And unless you are able to explain very logically why the number that you got to is true and it's undoubtedly true, they are going to bash it and the discussion is going to turn political and not logical, and you're not going to get your point across. The other person's just going to say, I have experience in this industry, I know what you're talking about, you don't, why would I trust your number? Right? So this is why you need to be able to communicate and discuss your assumption on a high conceptual level. Not only you need to be able to perform it accurately. Okay? Now that you understand what skills you need to have and why you need to have them and how you're going to use them, I'm going to get exactly into the concrete situation we're simulating, because that's going to make it a lot more clear to you why and how you should perform in those case interviews. We're simulating in a case interview a discussion about an analysis that you are having as an associate with a manager or partner before doing an analysis. Then we're simulating you doing the analysis and you're getting the data that you would get from the client or from the market or whatever, you're getting it from the interviewer. Instead of placing it all in Excel or SQL or whatever data processing tool you're going to use your pen and paper to do math. And then you're going to discuss the results with said manager or partner, which in the case is the interviewer, right? The other thing that we could be simulating is this very same thing with the client instead of a manager or partner. So you discuss an analysis you're going to run with the client. They might like it, they might dislike it, but they will need to agree on a conceptual level to what you're doing, right? And so given all of this, what I want you to understand is what are the skills that they're testing for in these situations? What skills are necessary in the situation that we're simulating and in all of the situations that will use quantitative analysis in the consulting job? Basically, number one, they're testing to see if you know what comparisons to do. They want to know that you can take conclusions from the data. Basically, that is seeing if you can have a discussion in the end of your analysis. They're seeing if you can interpret the number that you got and that you can lead from it. You can get to the next steps. This is step number 4 of the analytical process, which I'm going to show you the steps in a little bit. Because if you don't know what are the comparisons you're going to do, and if you don't know how to interpret the data, when you need to design the analysis instead of the interviewer asking you to calculate something, you won't be able to, because if you don't know what comparison you need to do, I want to compare, the market size of this product to the market size of the other product that we have or whatever. If you don't know that, then how are you going to know that you need to calculate the market size? You won't. So that's why they're testing this. Number 2, they want to know that you know how to process the numbers. That is basically step number 2, structuring your analysis. Because once you get all of that raw data, and trust me, it's a ton of data, how are you going to model it? What are you going to do to each of your numbers to get to the answer? If you don't know how to do this by yourself, then you can't be trusted alone with a computer, the data, and the Excel that you're going to get to an answer, right? Number 3, they're testing to see if you know what data you need. Basically, what's going to happen here in so many cases is that the interviewer is going to give you a few pieces of data, but they're not going to give you all of the pieces of data that you need. And they want to see you asking for the data so that they can tell that you know what data you need, right? They gave you some pieces of data, and that's mostly to guide you in what direction you should go. But they want to see that you can understand what data is missing and you can look for it somehow, in this case, asking it. It's very similar to the GMAT data sufficiency questions, because you need to be able to tell whether you have enough data to get to a conclusion or not. Basically, this skill derives from you knowing the structure that you're going to need to use and you having the business sense to know what extra data you might need. So what other factors might be affecting this number that are not obvious right now. And then you ask about those pieces of data to the interviewer. Next, number 4, they want to know that you know how to communicate this structure in English rather than in Excel or in numbers or only drawings, so that you can discuss it like we talked about before without wasting time, and so that you can prove that what you've done makes sense rather than being a guess or being wrong, right? What you're going to find in consulting is that a lot of the work is convincing, or maybe as much of the work in an analysis that is not what everyone wants it to be, as much as convincing as it is analyzing, right? And what you might have noticed from these skills is that math isn't exactly in there, right? They do want to know that you are able to do quick and easy math and that you're not going to screw up with numbers. You're going to be dealing with numbers a lot. So you need to be able to do some calculations in your mind, in your head, and quickly. But given all of these situations, math is not a priority. That is why so many times you see people saying, oh, I made a tiny mistake, the interviewer didn't care, we moved on. If you make many mistakes, that's a red flag. If you don't catch your own mistakes, that's a red flag. But math is essentially secondary. Excel is going to be doing most of the math in your consulting job. And yes, you need to be fluent with numbers, but that's not key to the analytical part of a consultant's work. And I'm going to show you a wrong answers only version of an analysis question, and I'm going to show you what the wrong answers mean to an interviewer. So imagine this is the question that we get in an analysis question in a case interview. So imagine we are working on a potential merger, and our client is the manufacturer of a product that is sold in Starbucks. And of course, the client wants to acquire a competitor. You're working on the revenue synergies front of the project, and you get to a moment where you will calculate the potential increase in revenues from adding the competitor's products next to your own in Starbucks shelves. And we have a few pieces of data for you here. We know that we currently sell in 3,000 Starbucks stores. Our products sell for 7 units per day. And we can expect, per store of course, and we can expect the competitor's products to sell at the same rate. Okay? And now let's say that I asked my interviewer, all right, so do we know the price at which the competitor's products are going to be sold? And let's say the interviewer says $2 per product. And do we know how many days the Starbucks stores are open in a year? And let's say the interviewer tells me it's 300. Okay, so I'm gonna do some math here. 7 times 300 is 2.1 thousand, times 2, that's 4.2 thousand. 4.2 thousand times 3,000, that gives me 12.6 million. So 12.6 million. And let's say that I know what the target company revenues are, and I'll say, oh, target revenues would grow 30% with that, so the acquisition seems like a great idea, and etc., etc. I say other things as well. Do you see the problem here? The interviewer has no idea what I just did. The interviewer just knows that I asked for some pieces of data and I did some calculations, which he has no idea what they were, where they were going to, what I did, and the number might even be right. And he would only know that the number is right because he is the interviewer. He designed that question. But in a real case, in a real project situation, what happens is this guy did not create the question. He's overseeing you solve a real life problem. And when you get to him with an answer that is just a number, and you don't at all explain what you did, you don't explain what you're going to do before, he can never know whether you were right or wrong. If he can't know if you're right or wrong, you can't convince him, and so he has to assume that you're wrong. And someone else that has to assume that you're wrong is the guy in the client's side that doesn't like your answer. they will say that you probably didn't consider a ton of stuff that they did consider, and they can only assume that you forgot and that you're wrong. And also from a case interview perspective, there's a problem with that, because they might know that you are right in that one because you got the number right. But since they have no idea how you did that, they can't be sure that you would do everything right and get you the right number in a different case. They can't know if you were just lucky. You need to show your work. So this is why we create a structure when solving an analysis. Now, there's also another problem with the answer that I just gave you. So there's something you might not have noticed that I didn't do, but I didn't ask the interviewer if there was going to be any cannibalization on the units that we currently sell. So let's say we currently sell 7 units per day. Our competitor, that once we place them there, is also going to sell 7 units per day. But since the consumers are the same that are buying, some of them are not going to buy our product and buy only the competitors. So we can expect our sales to decrease to 4 units per day or something. If that happens, then that changes the revenue synergies, and I should have taken that into consideration. Another thing that I could have asked is, are we going to be able to sell to Starbucks at a higher price, since we are going to, have more negotiation power with them because we're going to be selling more units to them? And in those two cases, the answer would be no. There would be no cannibalization and the price would not change. I only know this because I created this case. I created this case for this specific example. The case is in my mind. The answer is in my mind. It can be whatever I want. And in this case, those don't change. The fact that they don't affect the answer do not affect the fact that I need to ask about these things. Why? Because they show to my interviewer that if the case were different, then I would still have gotten it right. It doesn't matter that I got you the right number if I didn't consider a factor that does not play off in this case, but could have played off in this case. If I don't ask these questions, it shows to the interviewer that I can execute, but I can't think. The interviewer can't trust me with a problem that they don't fully understand and that they can't completely double check my work. They will always know that I need someone who will save me, someone who will check my work and who will find the stuff that I need to be creative in order to consider, right? And so in the end, I won't be saving the managers and the partners time. I will be adding more work to their workload. And so they won't be able to manage as many projects as they wish they did, and that will get them, more money to the firm and more happiness to the clients and whatever, right? And so they will be hiring, if they hire me, they won't be hiring someone who help them catch mistakes, who help them solve problems. They're going to be hiring someone who will be making new mistakes and who will be creating problems for them. Now I want you to consider this other potential answer. Let's say I tell the interviewer that I first want to find the revenues per store that we would have increased to the target's current revenues. And then I'd multiply that by the number of stores they would go in. And so that would give me the total revenue increase. And then I'd account for a cannibalization of our own products. And then I would account for a potential price increase for both our products and the target's products. Given that we're now selling them more stuff, we might have more leverage in the negotiation. And then I ask them if they know what price our units and the competitors' units sell for, and if there might be a price difference, if there is cannibalization expected, and how many days the stores would be open in the year. Then I run the calculations like I did before, and I tell them that the answer is 13 million or 12.6 million, but I don't say anything afterwards, right? The problem here is that I was not hired to give the interviewer a number. I was hired to solve the problem. And solving the problem doesn't mean getting to the number. It means actually solving the problems that the project has. So what they would expect me to do in a real consulting project is get to this number, know exactly what to do next, and start doing it. And if that is finding the right people to communicate this number, then that would be finding the right people to communicate this number. If that would be finding if there would be cost savings given this volume increase, or if there would be a price increase given this volume increase, and figuring that out somehow, or if that would be finding out if there are capacity issues or anything like that, that's what they want me to do. Or if it would even be just finding out what this 12.6 million means, that's what they're expecting me to do. They're not expecting me to give them a number. And if we're doing this project and I get to this number on Wednesday, but I can only talk to the manager on Monday, they don't want me to waste 2.5 days. They want me to know exactly what to do. And hell, if I am the manager, I need to be able to tell them what to do, and I need to be able to do this now because it's not such a hard skill. So if you don't know how to do this when you're going in the consulting firm, they assume that you're never going to learn. So, conclusion, you want to show that you know how to interpret the number that you get to, and that you know what to do with it and what other people should do with it as well. Now let me show you what a right answer would look like. So let's say that the interviewer tells me, the case question and all, and tells me the data. It's 3,000 stores. We currently sell 7 units per day. We can expect the target to sell for the same amount of units. And so I would tell them, all right, so first what I would do is find our revenues per store, the revenues per store that the target would have. And that would be just finding the number of units per year that would be sold and multiply that by the price per unit. Then I would find the total revenue increase for the target by multiplying the revenues per store that I got by the number of stores. Then I'd account for cannibalization, so I would find what our revenue decrease would be and remove that from the overall revenue increase. And then I would account for a potential price increase, if there is any, given that we're now selling a lot more units to Starbucks. We might have more negotiation leverage. So would it be okay if I asked you some questions right now? Let's say the interviewer says yes. So I'll tell them, okay, I'd like to know at what price do we expect our competitor to sell their products on average? And let's say the interviewer tells me it's $2. And I ask them, is there a difference expected in price between what they sell and we sell right now and what we would sell for, given that we'd have more negotiation leverage? And let's say they tell me, no, ignore that. And now I want to know, would there be cannibalization? Do we expect our products to sell less now that the target products are selling in the same shelves? And let's say the interviewer tells me to ignore this as well. And then I asked about the number of days a Starbucks store is open in a year, and they tell me 300. Okay? Now I'm going to multiply the number of units per day by the number of days in a year to get to the number of units in a store in a year. And so that's 7 times 300, that's 2.1 thousand. Now I want to multiply that by the price so I can get to the revenues per store. And so 2.1 thousand times $2, that is $4.2 thousand per store per year. Now I'm going to multiply that by the number of stores. So that would give me the revenue increase in total. So 4.2 thousand times 3,000 is 12.6 million. And since there's no cannibalization and no price increase, that is the final answer, 12.6 million. And right now I don't know what the target revenues are, but I would like to know so that I can know, like, let's say that this is a 30% increase in their revenues. This seems like a really good idea of acquisition because we would acquire, let's say we acquire them for a fair price, but right off the bat, we increase the revenues and therefore probably their value even more than that by 30%. This is an amazing investment by all means. Now, what I would do next is first find out what the target revenues are so that I can actually size the benefit. But then I try to figure out if there might be cost savings in the target's manufacturing process, given that now they're going to manufacture more units. I would try to find out if there would be a price increase, given that now we're going to sell more to Starbucks. Even though you told me to ignore that, that's necessary to know. And I would also try to figure out if our competitor can actually increase their capacity in that much. I don't know how much that is, but if it's significant, I want to know if they can increase their capacity easily or if there might need to be investments, because then I need to take that into account. That's not, a free increase in revenues just from the acquisition. Now, what you should have seen from this answer that I gave you is all of the mistakes that I showed before are not present. I showed the interviewer exactly what I was going to do before. Then I asked them the questions that could be the numbers that I needed and the numbers that weren't logically necessary, but that could be affecting the case. And even though they were not used, the fact that I asked those questions is important. Then I calculated everything and I guided the interviewer through as I calculated. And to guide them through, I used the structure that I showed previously. And then after that, I told the interviewer exactly what that number that we got to meant, and I told them what I would do next, so that they know that I can not only work by myself, but also need a team if needed. Now, enough with what an analysis is, what are the skills, blah, blah, blah. Let's get right to the techniques that you need to learn to ace your case interviews, never get stuck again, etc. So basically, if you learn the step-by-step approach and the structuring technique that I'm going to teach you right now, and if you practice those until they're internalized, you will be able to create a robust structure for every single analysis question that you get, and you'll be able to generate useful insights. And you're going to show your interviewer that, one, you can work independently, which is something that they absolutely need, as they're all the time staffed under that assumption that all of their consultants can work independently. Number two, you're going to show them that you can take a quantitative problem off their hands without them worrying if they're going to need to redo your work or check your work more than just a quick glance and not trust you, right? Imagine if you have 6 of these problems, you're overwhelmed, and you have in front of you someone who could do half of your work for you. You're in heaven. That's exactly where the interviewer is sitting on right now. And you'll also be light years ahead of 99% of candidates who feel lost in the middle of the problem and need the interviewer's help to move forward because they don't exactly know what they're doing, and they can't move forward or move backward. Candidates who annoy the interviewer by not knowing the meaning of the number they're calculating, who have to hope for an easy or average question because they know that they can't handle a tough one, and candidates who are still playing the wrong game and call this a math problem. Believe me, the interviewer can see right through their poker faces. Now, before I show you the techniques, let's remember something. What are our goals when answering an analysis question? You want to show the interviewer your thought process so that they always know where we are, they always know that you'll get to the answer, that you will consider all of the variables so that you and the interviewer can discuss the issues and the approaches and the assumptions in isolation. Your goal is also to get to the right number, and your goal is to create a conclusion that's biased towards action, given the number that you've calculated and the case question. So the techniques that I'm going to show you are going to help you do exactly this. This is the 4-step approach that you will follow. First, I'm going to give you just the steps, and then I'm going to give you an example of an analytical question, and then I'm going to go through it while I explain the steps to you, and then right away show you an example of how it's done. The steps are: number 1, structure your problem. Number 2, ask for the data you need. Number 3, calculate. And number 4, once you get to the answer, lead from the insights. Now, let's get to the case question so that I can explain what each of those steps mean and how to do it from a real example and show you right away how it's done. This case question right here comes straight from a business idea that Bruno and I had way before we started crafting cases or even case interview coaching. It didn't go forward. It wasn't a really good idea. There might be ways out, but anyway, this is where this case question comes from. So your friend has a business idea and he asks what you think of it. They want to create a chain of high-end coffee micro kiosks in airports. Each unit would only occupy around 2 square meters, thus saving a lot of rent costs, and it would deliver super high quality coffee, which wouldn't cost significantly more per cup if well purchased, which your friend believes they can do. This way, they could easily take significant market share from the low quality overpriced coffee shops around. How would you analyze whether this is a good idea or not? And then let's say you answer with your framework for this question, which I'm not going to get into because I don't want to go into the framework question. But then you get the following data. Let's say that the price per coffee cup is $3.75. The total costs per cup of coffee for the micro kiosks is $1. And then there are the costs to open and create the micro kiosk stand for only 1 unit, which is $150,000. And the yearly operating costs, including rent and labor and etc. And that is $200,000 per year. And the question is, for 1 single unit, how many cups of coffee would they need to sell in order to break even their investment in 2 years? Now, you can start and right now run through all of the steps if you already feel safe to do so. What I'm going to do right now is pause before each step, explain you more details about the step, and then perform the step myself before moving on. Okay, so I'd highly recommend you watch my description of the step before pausing the video and doing the step by yourself. All right, let's go. Now I'm going to talk to you about the step number 1, structure. Structuring the problem is basically showing to the interviewer what exactly you're going to do from beginning to end to get to the number that they've asked you to calculate. So you'll say, I'm going to do this and this and this and that, and then I'm going to get to the final number. It should take you all the way throughout the calculations that you're going to do, and it should have no numbers. It should only be conceptual so that the interviewer can agree or disagree with you in terms of logic, and you don't have to dive, and you even can't dive into the specifics of each numbers. All right? I highly recommend you use step-by-step structures. There are several ways to do this. You could use formulas, you could use trees, but I highly recommend you use step-by-step structures because they're intuitive, they work for every single case, and they also give you a little bit of space to figure some stuff out on the go, but already have a proven path that will get you to your final answer. Now, I'm going to show you a technique. I'm going to explain to you a technique right now that will teach you how to create step-by-step structures for any problem. You're, of course, going to need a little bit of practice, and that's what you're going to get in the next videos. And also in this example right now, I'm going to show you myself using it. But it's a structure that if you practice, you will never have trouble getting to the structure for a problem again, unless it's a really complicated problem you've never seen before, and etc., if it's super hard. Then you might need a little bit more of mental power and perhaps the right kind of practice, but this technique is already a super strong tool even for those cases. So basically, here's what you're going to do. You come up with a number, you look at the numbers that you have, you look at the number that you need to get to, and you come up with a number that you know that you can get to and that you know that will get you there, right? So intuitively you know that you can get to that number and that it will get you there. Maybe you need to ask for data from the interviewer, that is fine, but you know that you can get to it, even if you don't know anything else. Now you have that number, okay? And that is step 1. And then you look at everything that you have again, and you come up with one number that you can get to that you know that will help you get there. That's all you know. That is step 2. And then you repeat that again and again and again until the last step gets you to the final number. Okay? I'm going to show this to you right now as I solve this question by myself. In a real case, I would have asked the interviewer for some time and then I'd create the structure in my mind. But in this case, I want to think out loud so that you can follow me. Okay? So I'm looking at these numbers, and one thing that I know that I can get to and that I know will help me somehow is the gross profits per cup of coffee, which is basically the price minus the variable costs. I know that's going to help me because it's the contribution that each cup of coffee gives me to cover those fixed costs and investments that we need to cover to reach break even. Okay? Now what I have is fixed costs, investments, and profits per cup of coffee. And so the next thing that I know that I can get to and that I know that will help me is the total fixed costs and investments that I'm going to have over these 2 years. So that's basically 2 years worth of fixed costs plus the investments. And this is my step 2, getting to total fixed costs and investments in 2 years. And then my step 3 is going to be finding how many of these tiny bits of profit I need in order to cover for those costs and investment. So that's step 3, actually getting to the number of cups of coffee that I need to sell. Okay, so this is my structure. After thinking through it this way, I present it to the interviewer as step number 1, get to the gross profits per cup of coffee. Step number 2, getting to the total fixed costs and investment that these gross profits will need to cover over 2 years. And step number 3, dividing the total fixed costs and investment by the profit per cup of coffee to get to the break-even number. Okay? Now let's talk about step number 2, asking for data. Many numbers that you will need are going to be clear to you that you're going to need and that you're going to need to figure it out somehow from your structure, because you are going to need to divide the number that you have by a number that, well, the interviewer didn't tell you, so you know that that's a piece of data that you need. But there's also another type of potentially missing data that you should look out for, and that is things that might affect your answer but that don't necessarily need to be there. Kind of like the cannibalization effect that I was talking about in the previous example, right? And in this case, it could be something like, let's say we are also selling something else other than coffee. The interviewer just didn't bother telling us, but we're also selling muffins or whatever, or mugs, I don't know. And so that would change the structure, because we would have something else that's also covering for costs and investments. And so that would change the break even. Now, that's something you should always look for when doing analysis questions, because even when they're not there, the interviewer expects you to ask for some stuff, because that shows them that you have the creativity to think about other factors that weren't mentioned but that might change the answer, which happens all the time in the consulting job. And they want to know that they can trust you to solve the problem by yourself and not have them need to ask you in the meeting when you present your results, but did you consider this? Did you consider that? Did you consider that? Okay? Another thing that you should know about asking for data. This is a mistake that a lot of people do. They see that they need a piece of data, and so they right away start estimating or guessing that piece of data or that number or whatever. And you should always request the missing numbers before estimating or guessing the numbers. Think about the interviewer like a skeptical client. They know the industry, they know a lot of numbers, but they don't know what you want until you ask. What this means is, if you ask, they know it and they're going to give it to you. And if they don't know it, then you can estimate. But if you don't ask and start estimating and they know that number, you're going to look silly, because you're going to be estimating and you're going to be wrong compared to someone who has the real number in their minds. And that's just going to look silly. That just makes you look bad. Now, if they don't know, then you can estimate, because both of you don't know and you just look smart because you're calculating a number from scratch. You're inventing a number from scratch. Okay? Now, one question that people ask us a lot is, when do you ask? Do you necessarily need to ask right now after the structure? And this is preferable. If you want to ask before the structure, you might get the interviewer a little bit confused, but that is generally fine. If you want to ask during the calculations afterwards, it's a little bit worse, because you kind of show to the interviewer that you'll start working without knowing all of the numbers and having all of the ingredients, which is a little bit weird, but it's also fine. The timing of the questions is not that important, okay? Just make sure that if you get a new number during your calculations and you need to change your structure, you will stop and you will do this explicitly. So, so this means that I need to change my structure in this and this and this way, and then you do it. All right? Now, in this case, the only question that I would ask, the only thing that's missing here is, I want to know if we're selling something else other than only cups of coffee. And the interviewer will tell me, no, we're only selling cups of coffee. Okay? Now let's get to step number 3, calculating. As I told you before, mental math and being really quick and being a genius calculator is something that is secondary in case interviews. Interviewers don't really care that much if you can, divide 3,000 by 17 in a split second. They really care that you are precise, and they really care that you're efficient. So you've got to be aware of that trade-off between precision and efficiency. All right? And you've got to find a soft spot for you. You got to make sure that you're precise, and then you add efficiency to your process. If there's a faster way, you use the faster way. If rounding will be a lot better and will not change the result a lot, then you will round, or you will request to round. Okay? This is how it goes. Don't worry about it too much, but of course make sure that you're not making a ton of mistakes. And if you can add efficiency, go ahead and add efficiency. Now, what a lot of people worry about, and you might be worrying about right now, is what if I make a mistake? And many people think that this means that they've lost the job and whatever. And most of the times it's not a problem. If you do only one mistake in the interview, the interviewer is just going to brush it off and say, it's all right, everyone makes mistakes. Happens all the time. But if you do it often, that is a problem. We want to avoid any mistakes, okay? But if you do them often, it's a really bad problem, because the interviewer is going to be annoyed, and they're going to think that you're careless and reckless, and that you might make those mistakes in a important conference and not like important conference room in an important meeting, might not check your numbers well, and you might not check other people's numbers well, and so that's not really good. So if you make a mistake, just follow on and do a great job in the rest of the case. The interviewer won't care. If you are practicing and you notice that you're making a lot of mistakes, then you've got to solve that problem, okay? And in my opinion, I'm going to be quick here because this is not key, but in my opinion, the best way to fix that problem is, before you do any math that is a little bit more complicated, you do a quick reality check before you run the number. So like 28 divided by 6, all right? You know that 28 is 7 times 4, so you know it's close to 4. But then you do the right math afterwards. Now you know that should be close to 4, but it should be a little bit more, and then do the calculation, you get to the right number. All right? Now, let's move on to the actual calculations in this case. So step number 1, I'm going to find the profit per cup of coffee. And that is 3.75 minus 1, that's 2.75. Step number 2, I'm going to find what is 2 years worth of fixed costs plus the investments. So that's 2 times 200,000 plus 150,000. 2 times 200,000 is 400,000. Plus 150 is 550,000. Now, step number 3, 550,000 divided by 2.75. So, first I'm going to quickly see this as 600,000 divided by 3. Both numbers are close to that, so it should be around 200,000. Now I'm going to actually divide 550 by 275 to get to this number, and it seems like 550 divided by 275 is 2, actually. So the number really is 200,000. And so this is the number of cups of coffee that we need to break even in 2 years. 200,000, yes. And now we're moving on to step number 4, which is getting insights and leading from them, finding next steps. Keep in mind that this is the most important step in an analysis question, and not only from a case interview perspective, but also from a consulting job perspective, because this is what makes consultants different. It's what makes their job so valuable to the client. It's what makes McKinsey's projects so expensive. It's because they give guidance to the client. They tell them what to do to get the most value out of their company, right? And basically what you're doing in this step is telling the interviewer what that number you got to means to the case and what should be done based on it. And you're also telling them any other interesting insight that you see from everything that you did that might help get you an answer to the case question. What you're showing is that you're not the one that's going to sit and wait for guidance once you're done. You are the one who knows how to use that number, and you know how to guide yourself and the project using it. And you, because of that, are the person that people will look for when they need guidance. This is a skill, as I've said before, that everyone in a consulting engagement must have. It's expected that you are able to do this, and this is why it's tested in the case interview. Now, you're going to do this in 3 steps. I know this is step 4, but I'm going to divide it up in 3 more steps. Step number 1, you're going to compare the number that you got to some other number. And you're going to do that to have a basis to say if it's too high or too low, too much or too little or whatever, right? And you're going to have to find what that comparison is. Number 2, you're going to say what this means from the case question point of view. So what does this number mean to the entire engagement that we're doing, to the case question that the interviewer told us right in the beginning of the case? And number 3, you're going to say what you and the client and the team should do next based on that. Okay? Now, let's get to what I would say in this case. Well, basically, I would look at this 200K and I would say, oh, okay, so 200,000 cups of coffee in 2 years. If we assume 350 days in a year, that's around 300 cups per day. And if we assume that the coffee shop is open 15 hours a day, that would mean 20 cups an hour, or 1 cup every 3 minutes. And that's not only in peak times, but also like 10 p.m. when not that many people drink coffee. This looks way too optimistic in my opinion. Like, I'm thinking of looking at a coffee shop in the airport, and of course there's a lot of movement, but not necessarily all of them are buying coffee, and honestly very little of them are buying only coffee. And since this is only one location, we can't really assume that we can take market share from all of the airport, only from the surroundings. So it makes sense to think of 1 or 2 specific coffee shops that would be close to this one. And we can only get the customers who care about the quality of coffee, which are obviously not all of them, and customers who don't want anything else, that are not going into the coffee shop and asking for, a cup of coffee and something to eat or whatever, because they want to buy everything at the same place. So that's not a very large fraction of the customers. I would not trust that we can easily get to those 200,000 cups of coffee in 2 years. Now, if I were to do something next, it would probably be see if we can sell something else in order to increase the average ticket of each customer. So, for example, we could sell coffee beans, bags of those coffee beans, so that people can take home to brew their own coffee, also so that they can give away as gifts with a very high value added. Like if these are really high quality gifts that are well sourced, straight from the farm or whatever, we can probably package those as gifts and sell them at a high price. And this might make the business worthy, but it doesn't look too promising to me from the perspective of only selling cups of coffee. So now you might be asking yourself, what happens next? Like, we're doing a real case here. What happens next? If this were a candidate-led case, then the interviewer would just allow you to follow on with your next step and maybe give you some data for that one next step. They might question your assumption, your conclusion, and then you can discuss that conclusion with them. Or the interviewer might just say, time's up, I want a recommendation. And you might have at least a better recommendation to give than before doing the analysis, since you already know what that number means to your case question. If this were an interviewer-led case, then the interviewer might be satisfied and just ask you a new question because you've fulfilled everything they wanted to know. The interviewer might be curious and impressed with your follow-up, and ask you for a follow-up question. Like, for example, what other kinds of things can we sell other than coffee bean bags so that we can increase the average ticket and make this work? Or maybe they could ask you, what are other places that we could place this kiosk if we're able to make it profitable? Give me some ideas. The most common type would be a mix between the interviewer-led and the candidate-led interview, where the interviewer might be satisfied, like it's a candidate-led case generally, but the interviewer is satisfied with you show them, and they need to see other types of things. They need to test other stuff in your skills, and so they'll just ask you a new question or tell you to go a different way or whatever. And that's the most common path, honestly, unless it's a McKinsey first round case where they have the questions lined up. This is probably how it would go. Now, if this were a real project, then after the analysis, you have tested the hypothesis you wanted. You go back to the beginning of your project and see what this means to the big picture, create those next steps, and go do them. You'd probably present this to someone, to the manager, to the partner, discuss those next steps that you came up with, and then go do them. And in this case, it would probably be, as you saw, finding ways to improve the average ticket so that we can make this business work. All right, this is it for right now. Now, I'd highly recommend you go check out the drill videos and work through this step-by-step process and internalize it. Internalize the technique to create structures by yourself also, so that you can be able to create structures for any case and never again get stuck in an analytical question. Because I know that there's no worse feeling than blanking out in the middle of an analytical question case. Okay? Right, I'll see you in the next video.